right, hello everyone. Tyler King here with the Denver Gazette following Colorado's 36-20 loss here in Houston at TD Stadium here in Houston. It's a nice night here in Houston, pretty hot, but not a nice night for Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes as they drop the Big 12 opener and fall to 1-2 on the season, 0-2 against teams that were not in the FCS last year. Obviously, Delaware getting newly promoted to the FBS this year, but obviously was an FCS team last season that the Buffs were able to beat last week, but neither side of the ball able to carry over any sort of momentum from last week's win as they get pretty thoroughly beaten on both sides of the ball tonight, dominated at the line of scrimmage, and just generally outside of two touchdown drives at the end of the first half to close the gap to 16-14, the Buffs were just not really in this game. They get I think Houston had the ball for nearly 13 minutes in the third quarter. That featured one long scoring drive to start the quarter. Then the Buffs go 3-and-out. Houston gets the ball right back, and then they score a touchdown to really kind of put things away pretty early. Not pretty early, but near the end of the third quarter. Because by the start of the fourth quarter, it just felt like there wasn't really a path for the Buffs to getting back in this game, even if they were able to put together a touchdown drive. The defense probably wasn't going to hold up their end of the bargain, and they were going to struggled to get off the field. I mean, Houston just kind of did whatever it wanted to in this game. And, afterwards, Coach Prime was saying that he was perplexed by this performance and he didn't see it coming. And while I didn't predict, a loss of this magnitude for the Buffs, a 16-point, pretty clear beatdown. I think the score maybe was a little bit closer than the game suggested on what was played on the field. I had the Houston winning a pretty close game. I think my prediction ended up being like 27-23 or something like that. But I was not confident coming into this game for the Buffs. I thought they might be able to do a little bit more offensively with Ryan Staub at quarterback, who I'll talk about in a minute, just did not have his best night. But this is just not a very good Buffs defense right now, and they're struggling to stop anybody. We saw it in the opener against Georgia Tech when they rushed for over 300 yards through their quarterback running back duo of Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. We even saw it last week. They were not, even though they only gave us 7 points against Delaware was able to get over 300 yards passing, get a bunch of chunk plays and things like that. And this Buffs defense is just not putting up really any sort of resistance at the line of scrimmage. Got pushed around tonight. It was a pretty balanced attack for Houston in terms of yardage. They ran the ball over 50 times, and it was pretty. Who had 22 carries for 89 yards and touchdown. Connor Wegman, the dual threat quarterback, a pretty good player in his own right, had 17 carries for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 222 passing yards as well, as Houston put up over 400 yards of total offense. 21 first downs. Just outclassed the Buffs, in every way, especially on offense. And for the Buffs offensively, like I said earlier, Ryan Staub just not the same player we saw last week against Delaware, and yeah, that's to be expected because it's a level up in competition. But never got in a rhythm. Bunch of 3-and-outs early. They crossed the 50 on the first drive, but then a couple of bad passes, some incompletions ends that drive, and then it's just kind of 3-and-out after that until, like I said, they get the 2 late touchdowns at the end of the first quarter. But I mean, I just don't know where this team goes from here because it's really not going to get any easier. And this is a pretty demoralizing performance. I thought, I had said before the season started that the TCU game in early October would be maybe the one that tells the story of not the entire season, but maybe sets the trajectory for the rest of Big 12 play. But maybe it ends up being this one. And maybe this is the game where we realize this Colorado team just isn't that good. It's like I said, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I'm just really this is where I'm more surprised by the Buffs. I was not surprised that they lost this game like Coach Prime was after the game, saying he's dumbfounded, could not have predicted this coming. I could have saw this coming, maybe not, like I said, to this magnitude of a loss, but I did not predict them to win this game. But overall, through 30 games here, it's defensively that is the biggest issue for me. And I hate to say, I don't want to say that the coaching is bad because we just saw this near the exact same staff put together a really, really good defense last year. Granted, with arguably some better personnel, and maybe that's the root of the issue here. But like Robert Livingston last year led that turnaround for that Buffs defense, kind of getting the most of that year's team, which it had its flaws as well, but also had guys like Travis Hunter, B.J. Green, Nikai Hill Green, Levante Bentley at linebacker, Shiloh Sanders, Cam Silman-Craig at safety. Like there are a lot of guys that are gone from this last year's team, but it's the same coaching staff, and they're just not getting nearly the same amount of production out of the defense this year. And maybe it's because there's too much rotation going on. It feels like at every level they're still trying to figure out who their core guys are, especially at linebacker. There's a lot of rotation there between the four guys that we've seen a lot of. Safety, there was a bunch of different, 5 or 6 different guys that got in there. At cornerback, McCarty Vickers played a lot of the game today, and he gave up a big completion down the right sideline on the opposite side from where I'm standing. And the defensive line is just not getting kind of any pressure, any push at the line of scrimmage. Couple TFLs today, a couple sacks. Alex McPherson, the true freshman, looked pretty good. I thought. I mean, he could be in for a bigger role, but you just don't really have anybody sticking out to you on this defense. And that's even goes for DJ McKinney and Preston Hodge, the guys in the secondary room that you felt like would be the cornerstones, maybe of this entire defense, if not certainly the passing defense. And even those guys are getting beat for decent sized completions down the field, which could be because the defensive line isn't putting much pressure on the quarterback, or I just really, it's really surprised me how this defense has fared through 3 games right here. Offensively, I kind of get it at this point. I mean, Ryan Staub obviously gets the start tonight. I don't know where they go from here in that regard. Maybe they go back to Caden Salter because Ryan Staub just didn't provide the jolt that maybe you would have expected after what he was able to do last week, and not just the stuff on the field, but kind of galvanizing the troops and getting everybody rallied behind a guy like that. They just didn't really have much of an identity tonight offensively. They really struggled on third down. All of Ryan Staub's completions were short completions outside of the one touchdown to Joseph Williams late in the game after it was pretty well decided. He had some accuracy issues. There were some drops too by receivers at times, but just not nearly on the same, nowhere near on the same page offensively. That starts with Pat Shurmur calling plays up in the booth, and it goes down to Staub and the rest of the offense on the field. Offensive line has been fine. They're not generating much of a push for the running game outside of that one hole they created for Simeon Price, who had a 38-yard touchdown in the first half that got the Buffs on the scoreboard. But I mean, they were behind for much of this game, like I said, so they're really trying to push the issue in the passing game, and they're trying to work in different guys at receiver, whether it's the transfers like Sincere Brown, Joseph Williams, who I mentioned, Hakeem Williams as well, or the returners like Amarion Miller, who made a return this week after missing last week with a hamstring injury. Traylon Miller as well. Doesn't feel like anybody's got a rhythm in the wide receiver room. They're not getting. There's no star as like there were last year, where you felt like any of those 4 guys that are now in the NFL could have had a big game at any moment. You just don't really have that feeling with this Buffs receiving group right now, and maybe that's because there are multiple different quarterbacks working in practice. This week, obviously, it was Ryan Staub getting the majority of the reps, in anticipation of him starting. But that's probably going to change again this week. They might, like I said, maybe go back to Caden Salter, maybe go to Juju Lewis. I don't really know what you do. I would probably go back to Caden Salter because, like I said last week, I didn't think he was that bad, especially in that Georgia Tech game. They let him play that entire game. There were some kinks to work out, but at least it felt like they had an identity of running the ball, and they could have they even could have taken advantage of some more opportunities to run the ball in that game, even when they had a pretty solid day on the ground. And last week, Salter leads 10 points on the first 2 drives of the game against Delaware. This week, obviously, doesn't see the field at all. I feel like maybe that's just their best route offensively, is to really lean into the ground game and some of the guys they have out of the backfield, like Simeon Price, who continues to emerge. Mike was dressed today. I thought he was going to play, but he obviously didn't get in the game at all. And DeKalen Taylor had, I think, 1 solid run, but other than that, 2 carries for 11 yards. Nothing really to write home about there. And one of the carries was 11 yards, so the other one went for nothing. So Buffs in total had what is the number here? 96 yards on the ground. Just not nearly what this year's team needs to be doing, because they don't have the Shedeur Sanders or Travis Hunter and the other other talented wide receivers that were on last year's team. They don't have those guys around to really carry this offense through the passing game. So, like I said, maybe it is Caden Salter that Deion Sanders goes back to next week. I don't know. That's probably what I would do. You got a game against Wyoming, which is a game you should win pretty handily, and maybe gets you back on track, because it's not going to get any easier when Big 12 play restarts in 2 weeks, when BYU comes to Boulder for a late night kickoff, which was another weird thing that Coach Prime mentioned after the game, saying that they're just not very good in these late night kickoffs, which tonight wasn't even that late. It was 6:30 local time, 5:30 for the guys that are used to for Mountain Time. So I don't know what that was about. I mean, thinking about it after he mentioned that comment, I was like, yeah, they, in that first season they struggled in some of the late 8:15 kickoffs, which unfortunately for the Buffs are the next two games. Unfortunately for me too, by the way, I don't like these late night, especially the 8 p.m. kickoffs. I don't like them all that much either. I like the one much like the 1:30 kickoff we had last week against Delaware. But we'll see where the Buffs go from here. I think there's a lot of soul searching to do. Obviously, one non-conference game left against Wyoming, a game they should win next Saturday night at home before Big 12 play restarts, like I said, against BYU in 2 weeks. And that's a BYU team that's looked better than maybe I expected coming into the season, maybe against some lower competition, but that's a team that's going to be hungry to build on what they did against the Buffs in the Alamo Bowl last year and continue to establish themselves as a clear Big 12 contender ahead of the likes of the Buffs and many others. And then, at TCU in October against a really good team on the road in less than a month now, that's going to be a really tough game. Iowa State after that at home. I mean, it's a much tougher schedule this year for the Buffs than they had last year. And if they look anything like they did tonight going forward, they're going to be in big trouble and they're going to struggle to make a bowl game, which I struggle to. I don't want to overreact to a performance like this because it is so early in the season, and there's so much for this team to that they can improve on. Like it's not just I don't know how they do it. Like I feel like there's a lot of stuff that they could easily correct over the next couple of weeks. They're just gonna have to do it pretty quickly, and we're gonna have to see some pretty substantial improvement over the next couple of weeks to believe this team can make a bowl game. Because I was pretty down on this team last year. I remember after the Nebraska game feeling like they weren't going to be a contender in the Big 12. They obviously proved me wrong. Get to win 9 games, get to the Alamo Bowl. But this is just a very different team, and it's clear that maybe the depth they thought they had before the season was not the quality of depth that they wanted. Maybe it's depth of some average players, but you're not really seeing the stars emerge, and they're just trying to figure out on both sides of the ball who their guys are. And even in an era where the transfer portal is the name of the game, and every team across the country is trying to get new guys adjusted to the system and playing with each other. This 3 weeks in, it just feels like the Buffs haven't gained much ground in that regard, and are still searching for any sort of identity on either side of the ball. So, like I said, disappointing performance from the Buffs tonight. I've got full coverage of the game at DenverGazette.com. With Coach Prime's comments, being a little puzzled about the game, obviously a story on the offense and the defense, respectively, and kind of their struggles in this game tonight. So make sure to go to DenverGazette.com to check all of that out. Appreciate all of you for watching this video. Stay tuned for next week when we get ready for that Wyoming game. Like I said, that wraps up non-conference play next Saturday. So thanks again for watching. Make sure to go follow me over on Twitter at King_TylerB or BlueSky if you prefer as well. But just stay tuned to the channel for more Buffs coverage to come.